Hello everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. A return to form in 2024 with Maker's Mark Cellar Aged. The first release of Maker's Mark Cellar Aged, the oldest whisky Maker's Mark have ever publicly released. Bottled at 57.85% ABV and is a combination of 87% 12-year-old whiskies and 13% 11-year-old whiskies. This came with a rather detailed, from a distance it looks a bit like a restaurant menu, a very detailed breakdown of everything, including a picture of the limestone warehouse where indeed this whisky is kept and where Maker's Mark 46 is kept too. I'm not going to dive deep into this because it's a lot of information. For any of you that do follow us on social channels, our Instagram, our Facebook and our Twitter will all be in the little drop down box below. So if you head there, there'll be some pretty cool close-ups of this. Essentially, we have 4 barrels of 12-year-old product, 1 barrel of 11-year-old product, and that breakdown of 6713. And then some pretty interesting information about distillation dates, average cellar humidity, very nerdy stuff. But this is the first of what will be a yearly release from Maker's Mark. Number 1. An absolutely stunning bottle to look at. It almost has this kind of, can I bring it in here? Hopefully it'll focus on it, not me. There's almost like this kind of mottled effect to the glass. It almost like shimmers without the light reflecting on it. You can see it a little bit better there. It's got this kind of dimpling to it. Love just the signature on the front. I think that's great. 2023 release. Maker's Mark Cellar Aged Limited Edition. Still got the wax, still got everything. Very simple label, just little bits around the sides of it. Big Maker's Mark fan, wearing red to match this day. And here we have it in this glass. Been so privileged to take part in many Maker's Mark private barrel selects, try loads of other private barrel selects in the UK as exclusive releases. Loads and loads of fun stuff, always like the liquid. I was amazed that I was able to get my hands on a bottle of this. The company I work for, the whisky shop, we only managed to get 4 for our Manchester shop. A customer dropped out, no one else seemed to want it, which I was kind of amazed at, so I put my name in the hat and opened it, well, bought it and then opened it, sort of took it home with me. But here we have this beautifully dark liquid. Years ago I remember sitting in on a chat with Maker's Mark, people who work with Maker's Mark, and everyone always asks, why don't you release older whiskey? Their average whiskey is about 6 years old. And the answer was, we've tried it and it doesn't really work. It doesn't really fit our profile, there's too much tannic structure, it's just overly dry, it's not what we are looking for as Maker's Mark. And then when you look at most of the product in this being 12 years old, just want to double check I'm right with that. Yes, always double check. You have a situation where it enters into things like Weller 12 territory and Van Winkle 12 territory, of which it is more affordable. Its retail price was about £140 compared to the prices that are actually displayed for things like Weller 12 and Van Winkle 12 in the UK, which are significantly marked up. Anyway, that's the politics of whiskey retail. Let's dive into this rather stunning smelling liquid. The beautiful thing about this, and I'm not the first one to review this whiskey, it's not the shoutiest thing up front. Like with Weller 12, you always get like appley caramel sort of stuff. Van Winkle is all about this buttery corn thing. And Maker's Mark is about those things as well. But the smell on this is almost like rum. It's loaded with these deep molassesy brown sugars, and it's sparsely and massively contrasted with this really floral element. It's like lily of the valley, it's like elderflower. If you've ever had a bottle of like Paris Saint-Germain elderflower liqueur, there are some elements of that in there too. Not a particularly nice note, but for any of us that grew up playing with Play-Doh, there is almost like a Play-Doh-y note, like the smell of that in there. little bits of spice, but again they're contrasted with really big sweetness. Like you get black pepper, but then you get fudge. You get this little bit of kind of jalapeno-y, almost jalapeno pickled spicy things, and then that's absolutely thrown out the door by this wave of like lemon drop and more brown sugar. But if you had all three, not that any scores will be compared to Weller 12 or Van Winkle 12, but if you had all three side by side, I think this would come across as the quietest. And this is not a particularly clean glass, it's a little bit foggy, but I'll still do if we can see if we can do just the close-up of the body on this, because it is pretty oily. It is doing its thing very nicely. Taste time. I've had this open for a while. Bought this in early December and I've just been waiting to review it. That's the first time I've tried it since I opened it, and whoa. The heat, the barrel spice, the oakiness. Move that to one side, that's more of a flavour development for the end. The initial arrival is oily, rich, so much texture to it. Again, that brown sugar, brown butter. It hits your tongue and you're just given these almost like French culinary flavour profiles. It's quite incredible. Then you start to develop those, again, lemon drop, slight espresso notes. Classic Maker's Mark comes into it in the middle. The middle is very familiar territory. And we have this chocolatey, biscuity, orange oil thing. The floral notes from the nose are gone. And the Play-Doh note isn't on the taste either, which I'm sure you're all happy about. But that was more of a nostalgic thing. But my God, the finish on it. At 57.15, the push of this, even though it is stored in a temperature-controlled warehouse, the push of the oak on this is insane. You get the dry wood. I know they didn't want it to go too tannin-esque. It does have it in there. But I think having it at the strength helps massively too, because the contrast of flavour is impressive. And even though I swallowed that quite a while ago, I'm still talking to you now and still tasting it. And it is these deep, rich, woody notes. The barrels are only level 3 char, so they're not particularly heavily charred. I mean, it's kind of like normal, I suppose, but they're not overly charred or anything. But the spice you pull out of this thing is just insane. And to go back to it now, there's like croissants and more buttery things and like fresh bakery stuff. The one point I was going to make, when just before and just after that middle part of the taste where we get this classic Maker's profile, before it goes very oaky, cognac, or whatever your preferred type of French grape distillate would be, whether it be cognac, armagnac or generic brandy, that kind of heavily sherried, not heavily sherried, but heavily soaked, marinated fruit, that voluptuous fruitiness that cognac is so associated with, really comes through in it. It really does push through quite a bit. One more taste and then we'll score it. Still get it. There's that big oaky thing. I mentioned this a lot towards the end of last year, maybe because I'm getting more into cocktails, but now the finish, those bitter notes, things like wormwood, gentian root, Campari, Italian, deep dark Italian vermouth, really, really bitter dark chocolate, like 80-85% dark chocolate. It gives you all this big, round, elegant, sweet, I've used the word already, but voluptuous, hedonistic sweetness. And then the end is just big and deep and dark and bitter and oaky. For want of a better phrase, it's a very adult version of Maker's Mark. Because the standard Makers and Makers 46 and Makers Cask Strength, they're all beautiful and brown sugary and sweet and rich and decadent. This just pushes it to a different level. I'd be intrigued to know how different the 2024 release would be, if it was the same age but younger whiskey or even older whiskey. Really, really good. The bitter thing could put a lot of people off. It would have put me off a couple of years ago. It probably would have been too bitter for me as a finish. But I really like that sort of flavour now. So my palate's developing, as all of ours do. However, even with that, I think this gets like a solid 8.5 out of 10. It's something which is really fun, really different, very interesting, especially if you're a Maker's Mark fan or just a bourbon nerd. It's very interesting liquid, but I really don't think it's going to be for everyone. Collectors will put it on their shelves, fine, do what you will. But for drinkers, I think this is something that you are going to reach for every now and then when you just want something that's got, as Scotch drinkers and Irish whiskey drinkers, something which has age to it, which is a weird thing to say for bourbon because so many bourbons used to be 10 and 12 years old. For Maker's Mark, this is particularly unique, and for a very progressive distillery, this is a very progressive product. But I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I just hope this year's release is like radically different, just for the sake of contrast. But thank you all for watching. I will see you all next week with another whiskey review, and this was Maker's Mark Cellar Aged 2023. Cheers.